even Lando said, oh, well, that's to this year. Next year, it's all back to square one again. And Oscar's got his chance of winning the championship. Red rag to a bull, that stuff. Because I can tell you now, Oscar's going to come out of the blocks absolutely full chat. And he can sniff a championship now for sure. Part of the art of Formula One is reading your opposition and reading what they're going to do. It's no good being surprised by things. You've got to be on top of it. That's how you win world championships. Max is very good at knowing when to push and when to shove and when to go absolutely to the limit of the regulations and maybe beyond them if it's what it takes to win. What's wrong with that? He's a winner.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. I am joined as always by my friend and yours, the goatiest F1 mind to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you keeping, good sir?
I'm very well, mate. Yeah, very busy week we're in at the moment and very busy past week, but the sun's shining, 21 degrees, light breeze, blue sky. What can one complain about?
Or always Mr. Glass half empty, Peter. That's why so many millions and millions subscribe to your YouTube channel. Let me ask you the first question, as is compulsory, sir. What do you think was the biggest story to come out of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix?
Well, it's a good one, isn't it? I mean, I suppose you got to say McLaren clinching their Constructors' Championship. Oddly, the first time since, what, is it 98 or something ridiculous? It seems a bit strange, that, doesn't it? But anyway, yes, it's the first time since 98 they've won it. And because in 99, I guess Ferrari won it, didn't they, with Irvine lucking into it all, and Michael breaking his leg. But yeah, going back to Abu Dhabi, I guess it was just McLaren finishing the job, doing the job, thanks to Lando Norris. No thanks to Oscar Piastri. And Lando doing everything he needed to do. Had Lando had a problem, any sort of problem, it would have been Ferrari's championship. Interesting point, isn't it? Yeah. It would have been 1-2, but, Piastri wasn't there to be the belt and braces guy that he should have been. But having said that, good job by McLaren. I kind of wonder where Ferrari lost the Constructors' Championship, because they were way ahead of McLaren by sort of Monaco. I guess it was that middle phase, wasn't it? They were just terrible at places like Imola and Canada, where they should have been good, and they weren't. And I guess it got away from them there, and they came back pretty well towards the end. But McLaren came back even more so, and ever since Miami, they've been pretty strong. Just a shame that Lando couldn't, put the other end of it together and win the Drivers' Championship, or McLaren couldn't win it for Lando, let's put it that way.
It's a good shout then, Peter. Let me ask you this next question as a follow-up. Did Lando Norris lose this Drivers' Championship, or did Max Verstappen win it?
Well, it's a good question, because there are ebbs and flows in every championship, apart from 88, I suppose you could say. And it was pretty obvious, I felt, and I did say at the time, that Red Bull weren't always going to win every race. Monaco was the beginning of that in a way, but it was pretty clear they're not going to win every race. Nobody ever does. And there was always going to be a slump at Red Bull. It was quite a big slump, and they're possibly still in it. But when the slump occurred, it was kind of coincidental with the rise of McLaren, and McLaren starting to get the car really nice for the two drivers. And that's why I was so vehement about the mistake they made in the Hungarian Grand Prix not to give the win to Lando, because you could not rely on Red Bull being down and out and not being in contention for a win for too long. It was pretty obvious they were in a slump, but when they're in the slump and you've suddenly found a sweet spot, you go for it. You do not play around with it. You maximize every possible point, and you try to continue to put pressure on a team like Red Bull in its slump to the point where it starts making mistakes. And if you look at the mathematics now, all the points that McLaren lost for Lando wouldn't have won him the Drivers' Championship. I make it about 37, 39 points. But had he been closer 2/3 of the way through the year, potentially Red Bull would have been under more pressure and they would have made more mistakes. And they may not have recovered as well as they did. And maybe Lando may not even, maybe Max may not have won the Brazilian Grand Prix. So it's not just a question of mathematics. It's a question of when there's a moment that's really impressive in terms of one being up, one down, you've really got to put your foot flat on the throttle and not start lifting and thinking about fairness of the two drivers and who's due the win and all that rubbish. And it's still, those words will come back, I think, to haunt McLaren and Lando. And if they don't, they should be. And they are: Lando, think about the championship, give the win to Oscar. Okay, he thought about the championship, and what happened? Nothing. As I said at the time, what does that mean? Does that mean that if he didn't give the win to Oscar, they were really going to mess around with his championship to the point where he had no chance of winning it? I mean, the whole thing was just, I'm still in complete and utter shock that they did that in Hungary. And nothing, until there's an explanation, proper explanation, I don't think I'll ever change my mind. And the same goes for what happened in Baku, really. There's still never been an explanation from McLaren as to why they brought Lando and Oscar in at that critical moment in Q1 when neither of them had qualified for Q2 with 6-7 minutes to go, and then sent them out again on the same set of tyres to do one lap when the track was absolutely packed with cars and yellow flags and everything else. The odds of one of them not getting through were pretty large at that point, and that was Lando. He should have been at least second in Baku. Anyway, I'm going on because I know those. We've covered those points before, but for me, it's when Red Bull were down, McLaren didn't do enough to consolidate Lando in their potential championship winning position. You can't. It's difficult to do that when Red Bull are on a roll, but when they're down, that's when you need to really, really maximize your points, and they didn't do that.
Peter, it feels like a what could have been type of season as far as McLaren. Although they celebrate the constructors' first time in 26 years, as you mentioned, it just feels like that. I feel like they've got a lot of work to do now. Bookmakers have installed them as favourites. All the guys and girls on the Sky Sports F1 broadcast say that Lando is favourite for the 2025 season. Do you think Lando is the favourite to win the Drivers' Championship next year, Peter? Or is there someone else that you have as your favourite?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, there were quite a lot of people slagging off Lando during the year, weren't they? Saying, he hasn't got what it takes to win and all the rest of it. Now, of course, they're all jumping on the bandwagon and saying, yeah, favourite. I don't even know what favourite means. I mean, most of the bookmakers have no clue about Formula One, so it's an irrelevant point anyway. I think the only question to ask is, if Lando has a race-winning car and therefore a championship-winning car with reliability next year, is he capable of winning the World Championship? Of course he is. Absolutely, no doubt. However, and it's a big however, he's got to beat Oscar Piastri to do that. In the same way that, of course, Lewis Hamilton can win races if the Ferrari's a race-winning car, but he's got to beat Charles Leclerc. That's the biggest thing, beating the guy in the same car. And even Lando said, that's to this year. Next year, it's all back to square one again, and Oscar's got his chance of winning the championship. Red rag to a bull, that stuff, because I can tell you now, Oscar's going to come out of the blocks absolutely full chat, and he can sniff a championship now for sure. And that's the biggest problem, Lando. So the question to ask is, in a straight fight in equal cars over a full season, can Lando Norris beat Oscar Piastri? That's the question. And, some people may say, well, Oscar's more aggressive, he's better in traffic, which may or may not be true. I might say Oscar's drives slightly shorter laps because he gets into the corner a little bit earlier, and he's worked very hard on that, even though it sort of went away from him towards the end of the year. And Lando has longer corners, and that may not serve him as well if he's under real pressure from Oscar, when Oscar's really got it hooked up. That's what I would say. So, but I think if you took Oscar out of the frame and you had, I don't know, some, young McLaren driver in the other car, or you brought back Daniel Ricciardo, I'd say absolutely for sure Lando can do it. But with Oscar in the other car, I think it's, you can't say that. Anyone who does say that doesn't know what they're talking about, really.
It's crazy. I think to your point about the Lando Norris criticism, Peter, I think still there is a lingering doubt about Lando's not his ability to drive, not the steering inputs or his feel on the throttle, nothing about his internal gyroscope. And do you know what I mean? Like, as far as being an F1 driver, Lando Norris is right there. Like, his ability is absolutely fantastic. But there's something to be said, I think, as far as the community is concerned, as far as his mental fortitude or lack thereof. Nico Rosberg was on the internationally syndicated podcast saying some words to that effect, that he's got. Nico said that Lando has what I had, as far as mental demons, I think was the terminology that he used. And that in order to win a drivers' championship, Lando will have to fix for those, or at least address them. And the community are of the opinion broadly that he kind of he's dismissing, or he pretends almost as if those don't exist, Peter, and that every time he gets a victory over a Max, it's simply lovely and he's full of banter. But let me ask the question to you this way: what does Lando need to do if indeed he has an issue as far as execution, mental fortitude, nervousness, anxiety? What does he need to do to get over that hump to deliver himself a drivers' championship?
Well, I don't think he's got any hump to get over so far as beating Max or Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton or George Russell are concerned. I think he's right up there with all of them. As I said, as I keep saying, his problem is how to beat Oscar Piastri at McLaren. That is the problem. And Nico's... It's interesting to hear Nico say that, because in reality, his race was against Lewis Hamilton and he managed to win that race for 1 year and he beat Lewis. And so the question is, can Lando beat Oscar Piastri? That is the question. And yeah, he does some things in the car. As I said, he's got longer corners, but he does some things in the car that I've never seen Oscar do, in this wonderful business of being able to come out of the throttle and brakes and let the car float in. Second Lesmo, Huon, Silverstone, he was really good on that. He's not as good as Max on that in the wet, and that's what we saw Max doing in Brazil. It was a race where you couldn't really go offline to find grip. There was no way you could outbrake people because everyone was on the racing line and everybody brakes late anyway. Max had to find a new way of doing it, and he did that. And it was that business of floating without throttle and brakes and just going into the corner faster and finding the grip level that nobody else was finding. And Lando does that very well in the dry. The jury's out, obviously, as to how well he does that in the wet. But that's just describing one of the little foibles of Lando. As I keep saying, the big issue is, in a straight fight, will he beat Oscar Piastri? Because that is potentially the world championship next year. And I was wondering whether on the podium in Abu Dhabi, with his arm around Lando, Zach Brown might have been saying to him out the corner of his mouth, "Don't worry, Lando, after everything you've done, I'm going to make sure you are the world champion next year if it's going to be a McLaren driver." Was Zach Brown saying that to him? I don't think he was. And I think Lando was caught up with all the euphoria of having won the Constructors' Championship. And let's face it, who cares about the Constructors' Championship apart from the teams themselves? I mean, it's the Drivers' Championship that we want to see resolved. And Lando's in all that euphoria. And yeah, I was part of the championship winning team, isn't it mega? And I finished second to Max. And if only we got the car better sooner. That's probably what he's saying inside his brain. But the reality is, he hasn't addressed the Oscar Piastri problem, I don't think. And, what was Oscar doing fighting Max at the first corner in Abu Dhabi? I know that was Max's problem in the sense that he created the incident. But all Oscar had to do that day was make sure he was top three, to make sure that if there was a problem with Lando, that they won the Constructors' Championship. And yet he fought for position, if you like, and didn't give Max room once Max started to slide. And he was out. And that's it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you could argue, well, how much of a team player is Oscar in that case? I would argue not much. I think he's in it for himself, and I don't in any way criticize him for that, because he's a racing driver, and that's what you expect of racing drivers, and that's what you expect when you fire Daniel Ricciardo and you hire a guy like Oscar Piastri. He's super quick, very aggressive, and wants to win above all costs, and that's he's absolutely give him 100% for that. But if you flash back to Hungary, turn one, and what Lando and Max did to avoid Oscar. And then you apply that in reverse to what happened in the first corner in Abu Dhabi, it's a bit odd, isn't it? And how much were McLaren saying to Oscar, above all, we want you coming out of that first corner behind Lando or in P3. You don't really care what it is, but make sure you're up there in the front of the race somewhere, because if Lando has a problem, you're the guy that's going to win the Constructors' Championship for us. And within 10 seconds, he was in the boonies. Anyway, this is the guy that Lando's got to beat. This is why I'm saying this. And he's not an easy guy to beat. It's as difficult to beat Oscar as it was for Nico to beat Lewis Hamilton, I think, when they were both at their peak in Mercedes. And that's a big, big, big thing for Lando. Forget everybody else, because it kind of depends on cars, depends on a million other things. It's beating Oscar Piastri that's the issue for Lando.
Wow. It's going to be interesting next year, Peter.
Yeah.
And to be fair to you, Peter, you've been beating the social media drum and saying that that's almost a detriment to Lando. And Nico Rosberg expanded on that and said that. Because I think the mode of discourse comes because as Lando crossed the line in Abu Dhabi, his statement was, "Next year will be my year," if I recall correctly. Nico Rosberg argues that you kind of don't need the pressure expectation loop that comes with that. Don't bring that on you. There's enough pressure in F1 as it is already. So to your point, if Lando is going to be an Oscar and a Max and a Lewis and a Charles, then he doesn't need to, do you know what I mean? He doesn't need to exacerbate that already not insubstantial pressure by saying something like, next year is going to be my year, I'm the favourite. Do you know what I mean, Peter?
Well, I do know what you mean. And I don't kind of agree with Nico on that. I think that's fair enough. He just dominated that race, totally in control from the pole. I think he's entitled to feel that way. He is a racing driver. I would have much preferred it if his race engineer had got on the radio as he crossed the line and said, Lando, really sorry for what we did to you in Hungary. We never made it up to you. We'll make it up to you next year. Don't worry, mate. You're the man. That's what I would like to have heard. No, don't leave it for Lando to say that. It should have been the guy that had been talking to Lando in Hungary. That's the guy that should have been on the radio apologizing and saying, don't worry, we'll do it next year. It's your championship, Lando. But of course, he's not allowed to say that because it's 50-50 garage. And, you can't say the wrong thing to upset the Piastri side of the garage. And that's the problem. That's the problem McLaren created the millisecond they fired Daniel Ricciardo, as I keep saying. And I don't see how they've got a solution to that problem. Because as much as Zach may say to Lando, don't worry, mate, next year it's yours. For sure he's going to say the same thing to Oscar. Why isn't he? What's he going to say to Oscar? Next year, don't worry, you're going to be P2. You're going to be right behind Lando in the championship. You're going to be a really good second. He's never going to say that, is he? And what's Oscar going to do if he does say that? Give me a break. Oscar's out there to win.
Houston, we have ourselves a problem at McLaren, I think.
Well, of course there is. It's a massive problem. And the best thing that happened for Lando, actually, is if the car's not that good next year and they're scratching to win more than 4 or 5 races and the rest of it's sort of for P3, P4, then we'll see Lando doing a really good job, I think, probably doing a better job than Oscar. But if it's a good car, race in, race out, I wouldn't want to be in Lando's shoes with Oscar alongside me, that's for sure.
Wow. Talk to me, Mr. Windsor, about the George Russell, Max Verstappen beef in inverted commas, because going into the race weekend, that's all that anybody was talking about. George Russell very much on the front foot, saying of Max that he's been a bully in F1 and somebody needs to stand up to him. I will be that person going forward. Whatever happened in the steward's room, that was behind the curtain and Max didn't need to talk about it. Now that he has talked about it, George said, I'm going to talk about it, and I'm not going to stand for it from Max anymore. What do you think about the interaction there, Peter, between George and Max? Is George doing the right thing? What Lando Norris potentially should have done earlier on in the season, and kind of beating his chest in front of a 4-time champion that is Max Verstappen?
Well, I don't think it means anything to Max. What other drivers say or think is probably irrelevant to him. He probably doesn't even enter his field of consciousness more than about 3 seconds. So I don't think it'll have any effect on Max. And I wouldn't have said he was a bully. I would have said he's a very fast, aggressive racing driver, very good at overtaking and fights for every millisecond of time and every centimeter of track. And he's the racing driver's racing driver. He doesn't get emotional and he just gets on with it. So I don't know what else to say, really. I mean, George, for me, one of the biggest sins of the year has been George Russell slagging off Pirelli, as I keep saying. I forget all this stuff with the stewards. Nobody seems to be taking George into account for trashing the sole supplier of tyres to Formula One. And if I was Toto Wolff, I'd be concerned about that, because you want a good relationship with Pirelli. You want to make sure that you totally understand everything they're doing. You're completely in sync with them. You spend a lot of time at the Pirelli factory over the winter getting to know all the guys. You do a massive amount of work. The tyre company, I'm not saying this is Pirelli, the tyre company in general is a hugely important part of any racing picture. Anybody with a racing brain knows that. And so I'd be very concerned if my lead driver was trashing Pirelli at every opportunity. I think that's a really bad thing, and I think the FIA should be on top of it as well. I think it's a completely forbidden area to be knocking Pirelli. It's like knocking some of the other big sponsors that are there as title sponsorships of the World Championship. That's what Pirelli are. You don't slag them off because one of the reasons George Russell's in Formula One is because of Pirelli.
But George can't help himself, can he?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, can he or can he not? I mean, you'd imagine Toto would be on top of that and would control it, wouldn't you? Even if he's a racing driver who's not very good at keeping his mouth shut, the team should be able to do that. As I said before, there's enough minions there. How many people do you see crammed into the Mercedes garage, staring at the screen, wonder what they all do? But at least one of them should be there to tell George what to say and what not to say about the Formula One sponsors.
He's almost like the self-appointed white knight of F1 drivers. He's the driver representative at the GPDA. It feels like he's taken it upon himself to be like the spokesperson, for want of a better word. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
but I agree.
I mean, GPDA was basically formed for safety reasons, that's the correct way for the GPDA to be operating, and that's a good thing. I think he'll do a very good job. He's got a good brain. He's eloquent, and he's prepared to put the time in. But I think in terms of saying something about another driver, that should all be behind closed doors. I suppose I'm getting around to answer your question, and I don't think it's appropriate for any driver, whether it be Max, George, anyone, to be criticizing other drivers. Really, it can all be done behind closed doors.
Yeah, fair. And I suppose that was George's point, was it not? That Max, in coming out and saying that George is, I can't even remember the words verbatim, but I think Max came out and was quite critical of George, what George said in the previous Grand Prix about the stewards, and then George answered back almost. But I agree with you, Peter. I think it's all a bit, I don't know, we're here for the racing, right, and with wheel-to-wheel combat more than the...
Well, and I think there's also an element here of respect, is there not? I mean, Max is a 4 times world champion, and there used to be a time when the world champion was afforded some respect by all other drivers, and his opinion was considered to be more important probably than most of the drivers, because he is the world champion. He's a representative of the drivers in that sense. That seems to have gone away with all the business of jumping out of the car and the number one finger and all the stuff about, aren't we all supermen? And it's all become a bit too materialistic and selfish. But the reality is, Max is a guy from whom a lot of racing drivers can learn. And I personally have a lot of respect for the way Max does keep his life very compartmentalized. And I think that's a really powerful tool that he has. And he doesn't allow himself to get emotionally carried away. And you see that, he just sort of makes the odd comment, and it might be quite detrimental about this or that, or the stewards, whatever it is. But, listen to what he's got to say. He's got a racing brain. We can all learn from Max Verstappen. All of us, including other Formula One drivers.
Very good point. I'll bookend this on this, though, Peter, just if I argue devil's advocate for a second. Isn't it high time that one of the other 19 on the grid took a stand? Probably isn't the right way of phrasing it, but isn't there a risk that the other 19 get dominated for another 4 years if indeed they let Max Verstappen have his own way? Surely at some point there is going to have to be somebody a la a George or a Lewis that kind of that picks at Max Verstappen, because I feel like Lando this year was kind of, to a certain extent, let Max have his way a little bit. Didn't really fight him the way that he could have done in terms of wheel-to-wheel combat. Austria being a good example. Cota probably another example. Shouldn't we applaud George for being the one to say, okay, Max, I know you've got 4. But the next one, I'm going to offer you that challenge.
Well, I'm still waiting to be convinced that Max is all these things that they describe. For me, Max is a driver who's super aggressive, but also super talented, and making sure he doesn't get hit by other people and keeps the car going. And that's a huge art, an incredible art. And what is it that they don't like about Max? I really don't get it. I've never got it from the minute he got into Formula One. Everybody said, he's this and that. But, wasn't it Romain Grosjean that brake tested him into Sainte Devote at Monaco? It wasn't Max's fault, as far as I can remember. And then there was a moment on the straight out of Eau Rouge up to Les Combes, same year, maybe the following year, when said, Max left it too close, But he knew he was doing it to Kimi, and he knew Kimi would be fine with that. He knows what he's doing. I'm sorry, I don't get it. I really don't get all these people who were jumping on Max at the beginning of his career for being too this, too that, and all the people now who are jumping on him saying he's too this, too that as well. He's just a racing driver doing a job, and occasionally he falls foul of the stewards and gets his penalty, and then he backs away a little bit, and then he carries on, just like all racing drivers. But he's so good at managing situations and staying out of trouble. What is everybody's problem?
Oh, Peter, we're going to have this Max Verstappen conversation. I think the criticism of granted.
Yeah, tell me what the criticism is, because I just don't get it.
All right, so earlier, there's a bit of a story arc as far as Max is concerned. 2015-16, when he first came into F1, it was everybody said that he was a crash merchant, super aggressive.
Well, which I've just said was untrue. I mean, they're doing that based on Monaco, I suppose, and he was clearly brake tested. If not brake tested, he came off the throttle really early.
I feel like earlier on in his career, there were a couple, I can't recall. Monaco, there were a few. I think he crashed in qualifying from memory. So there were a couple in Monaco. And I think that was worthy criticism. But he was young, Peter. Do you know what I mean? You've got to give.
Well, how many times has Franco Colapinto hit a wall or done something
mean,
since he got into Formula One?
Three out of the last three, which is
exactly. And everybody's saying how wonderful he is. You know, he was a young kid at the time.
What Lewis Hamilton fans in particular will say of Max, their criticism will be that Max oversteps the line, that in the face of adversity, a la Austria this year, that Max he can be a bull and see red sometimes, notwithstanding the fact that he's absolutely gangbusters, a brilliant driver. Sometimes they will say that he doesn't race as clean, or as he doesn't have the Sterling Moss finesse and the sporting etiquette. That's the criticism that they will leverage at him.
Yeah, but okay, if you want to relate it to Sterling Moss, I take the point. But then I take the point for every racing driver versus Sterling Moss, because Sterling made it very clear and wasn't afraid to say so, that he didn't think the World Championship was a very good idea and wasn't interested or not on whether he won the World Championship. All he wanted to do was take each race in its own right. Now, if George Russell and a few others want to stand up and say that, fine, I'll back them all the way. But so long as they're all in the World Championship and Max is in the World Championship, you've got to bear that in mind. And don't forget that a championship finale, when there's something in the balance, is a different race for those who are involved in the championship to a race 6 or race 7 or race 3. It's a different race. And I suppose a lot of people are saying, oh, well, look at Max in 21 with Lewis in the last couple of races. Well, all I would say with that was it was an unbelievably easy book to read. He was ahead on points, so he was obviously going to take more risk with Lewis, and he was going to do a few naughty things, because ultimately, even if he got the penalty or disqualification, if he took Lewis out, he was world champion. So, but that was an easy thing to read. It was easy to read that, that was, if you were Mercedes, you would know that's what they were doing. It's part of the art of Formula One is reading your opposition and reading what they're going to do. It's no good being surprised by things. You've got to be on top of it. That's how you win world championships. And I don't know. For me, it's all bets are off when it is a finale and it is a points thing rather than a race thing. Now, the FIA and maybe the public at large or the TV commentators might also all chime together and say, oh no, it's just a race, it's just a round of the World Championship. But it isn't. It never has been. Talk to Ayrton Senna. Why do you think Ayrton Senna didn't do up his seatbelts in the last half of the finale of the Formula 3 Championship, in the British Formula 3 Championship? He had to reach forward and get something out of the radiators because it was the championship finale, for Pete's sake. He wouldn't have done that in a normal race, would he? No. And so it goes on. And so Max is very good at knowing when to push and when to shove and when to go absolutely to the limit of the regulations and maybe beyond them, if it's what it takes to win. What's wrong with that? He's a winner. I just don't get it.
1,000%.
Well, I get it. I get what Max is doing. I don't get all the criticism.
I understand all the criticism. I tell you what, Peter, I'm the lens through which I ingest my Formula One has always been invested in Excellence PLC. And so for me, like you, as soon as I see Brazil, I understand the criticism and I think to a certain extent it's valid. But when I see a Brazil P17 to P1 in 43 laps and then he goes and does the remaining 16 fastest laps, I'm just like, okay, I am starry-eyed and all the other stuff fades to black for me,
Yeah. But my point is, Abu Dhabi 21, I think it was a ridiculously bad decision by Michael Massey at the wrong time. But having said all of that, if you are Mercedes, you are predicting that's what Red Bull are going to do. They're going to get on the blower to Michael, and they're going to do all they can now. And I wonder whether they're that sharp. That's all. And I wonder if the same thing applies to McLaren. I suspect it doesn't. I think the sharpest team out there is Red Bull. And maybe they're going to lose some of that edge with Jonathan Wheatley going to Sauber. That's an interesting point. And we'll see. We'll see. Only time will tell. But they're a pretty sharp team, Red Bull, when it comes to that. And Max will have grown from that. He's a part of that. You know, he's looking at every conceivable angle of how to finish third. If he knows the car's a P6 car with the grip level he's got and the graining he's got with the tyres after 4 laps, he's not going to think, how am I going to finish 6? He's going to think, how am I going to get that P6 car into P3? That's the way Max Verstappen thinks. And that's why he's as good as he is.
Touche, Mr. Windsor.
And I think some of his great drives this year were when he was finishing 3rd or 4th and not winning races.
1000%. And I find Max's dedication to the game that is racing almost epitomised when you hear Liam Lawson talk about Max giving him advice on his races in Super Formula. I doubt that there is another F1 driver that was paying attention to the nuance of Liam Lawson's races when he was in Super Formula. So
probably not.
No.
Or, you know, same with Pierre Gasly when he was winning in Super Formula. But, you know, it's a really good championship. But Max just loves motor racing, doesn't he? That's what he does.
He's not
and
bad.
he knows Super Formula is a really good championship and they're quick cars. And he knows Liam from the Red Bull thing.
Yeah.
So he's just a racer. He's not that interested in any of the other rubbish that's going on, all the politics. And I think Max is probably thinking, the more George Russell spends thinking about, you know, the stewards and I've been robbed or whatever he's thinking, the better for me, because I'm just going to get on and go karting or whatever he's going to do over the winter. Let George, you know, be his own man and do his own thing, because it'll be a distraction.
Speaking of somebody who loves racing, Lewis Hamilton again, a brilliant drive in the race all the way up to P4. But again, the criticism, it's one that splits the community, Peter, because it was a brilliant race, but yet another poor qualifying.
I love the way you talk about the community. Who is this community?
Well, I'm talking about the F1 merchants online, Peter. There are
right.
a gazillion. I know.
Not
that you should be invested in their opinion necessarily, but it's a source of conversation always.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm being naughty. Sorry.
So we've done one of these. On one side of the fence, we have Sir Lewis Hamilton, still has it at the age of 39, soon to be 40 years old. But give him a good car next year and he will win races. And again, your exhibit A is Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. On the other side of the fence, you've got a Nico Rosberg saying, Houston, we have a problem. Lewis Hamilton hasn't been brilliant in qualifying for the last 24 months. He's been soundly beaten by George Russell, who is only a 4-time race winner. He's not a champion. Therefore, you can expect Lewis Hamilton to struggle next year unless he can solve for that qualifying slump. On what side of that fence, Mr. Windsor, do you sit?
Mm-hmm. Well, Abu Dhabi did a better job in qualifying than Charles Leclerc, didn't he? So, you know, all those stats can be used to prove anything. As I said before, I think Lewis, if the Ferrari's got half a sweet spot and a decent front end most of the time, I think he'll be right there. I say right there, he'll be right there with Charles Leclerc. Now, whether or not they have the same overall grip and aero efficiency as McLaren or Red Bull, we don't know. But the only benchmark for Lewis is going to be Charles. And I think he'll be within 3/10 of Charles most days in a good car too. And that's all they want, isn't it? And so I think he'd be fine there. And I think he can, therefore, if the Ferrari is a race-winning car on any given day, I think Lewis will have a very good chance of winning races, definitely. The Abu Dhabi thing was a little bit out of context, wasn't it? Because he was the only guy to start on hards, was he not? And then finished on the medium. And it was quite a good way to go if you're Lewis and want to do something a bit different. And for once, he had a bit of grip at the end of the race, particularly at Abu Dhabi. And so that was good. But we shouldn't make too much of a fuss about that because it was just a strategy thing and it was only for 4th place anyway, so it didn't really mean much, did it? Yeah. But I think, you know, he'll, as I've said before, I think he'll relax. I think he'll be well shot of the whole Mercedes thing and looking forward to everything that comes with being a Ferrari driver. The fans, the red overalls, the cars, the pasta, whatever. And so he'll be relaxed and he'll drive well as a result. I'm sure he will. And I don't think you should say, oh, big problem. He's going to be slow in qualifying based on what he's been doing at Mercedes, because he's lost all confidence in that car. And it's too knife edgy. It didn't give him the front end he wanted more than about once or twice a year. And if he doesn't have a front end, we all know Lewis these days isn't going to put it on the line, because why should he? Who wants flick oversteer when you can not have it? So I think the Ferrari will be all right, and he'll be okay, and he'll be good. I think it'd be good. Whether it'd be better than Carlos Sainz is another matter, and I still think that's one of the biggest issues of the year. And one of the great things was Carlos, how well he drove, considering he was put into this absurd situation of being fired by the team before the year had started, and still having to do a great job for the team, which he did. He over-delivered, I think, this year, much by a big factor, and he should be given a massive amount of credit for that.
Not a bad peddler is Mr.
Well,
Sainz
that's not a
Jr.
bad thing. It's a sporting thing, an achievement. What he did this year was unheard of, and I think was one of the most difficult things I've ever seen a racing driver have to do. Wow. And yet he did it beautifully. I see they've got Santander sponsorship on the Williams now. Sadly, it's not a very big logo, so it's presumably not much money, but I hope all the money's going to Carlos Sainz in compensation for having to drive there.
Yeah, I agree. What did you make of seeing Carlos in the all white, no sponsorship overalls testing a Williams, Peter? I know that would have...
well, I didn't even open the email. I was so depressed by it all. I didn't even open the email, to be honest.
No Carlos, therefore, at Red Bull. However...
No.
There is conversations ongoing, right? It sounds like Checo Perez is fighting to get a $60 million settlement to be out of the car next year. Who do you think should replace Checo Perez if indeed that is a thing, Peter?
Well, it's a difficult one. I would put Carlos in the car for sure, but obviously that's not going to happen. So I would guess, I guess they're going to put Liam Lawson in, but I would have thought Yuki Tsunoda would be a better bet. Not a better bet. I just think he deserves it, really, because he's proved that he can bring a car home and finish in the points consistently. And not that Liam couldn't do that. I've always been a big Liam Lawson fan ever since GP3. And it'd just be if Yuki doesn't get that drive, I think it's going to be difficult to see where his career is going to go. And he's driven very well this year. In fact, you could argue that he's almost, if you're doing a sort of auto course top 10, you might want to put a Yuki Tsunoda in the top 10 this year for the job he did in finishing races and points he scored and generally being quick most of the time. So yeah, I would put Yuki in probably, but they'll probably put Liam in, I would guess.
100%.
And then they'll run Hajar in the Toro Rosso, in the whatever it's called, Steak Sauber thing. Yeah. No, not what's it called? It's not Steak Sauber, is it? Cash App. Sorry.
RB Visa Cash App, but they're changing.
They need to get some decent names again, don't they?
They're changing the name again, aren't they?
I hope so.
And to your point,
they should call it Minardi. There you go.
Oh, yeah, original. I think to your point, Peter, I think it will be Liam Lawson. But again, much to the disenchantment of Yuki Tsunoda fans, what does he have to do, Peter? He's out-qualified Liam Lawson 6-0. His average points are again materially better than that of Lawson since his comeback. What does
well, I think one of the things that has come over quite well is Liam's demeanor on the radio. Agreed. He's very calm, very relaxed, very lucid, very on top of what he's doing, on top of the situation. Never sounds too stressed or overwrought by anything, whereas Yuki is prone to quite savage swearing and emotion. And I maybe that adds up over a couple of years as to somebody that maybe is a bit uncomfortable to have him in the car. And it's odd that nobody's ever really got on top of Yuki to calm him down on the radio. Because in my experience, most of the Japanese Formula One drivers have always been pretty good on the radio, pretty polite and calm and methodical. And Yuki's been the sort of exception to the rule. Yeah. I don't know whether it's all the sort of whole, I'm a cool Red Bull dude and the caps and the jackets and the clothes and all that stuff and being a Formula One star got on top of him, or whether he's actually like that. I spoke to him a little bit when he was in Formula 3 and stuff, and he seemed pretty calm and quiet then, but But Liam definitely would score points. Forget about what you're seeing in the results and how they drive, but Liam would definitely score points with his demeanor and his approach to driving and to racing. I would have thought if you're choosing between the two.
Well, we'll get the announcement imminently, apparently,
Yeah.
Peter. Over the next 48 hours, we'll learn whether Checo Perez, he should be out though, Checo. Is that even a decision? Will Checo potentially, I heard that Eddie Jordan said that Checo and his team should be ashamed of themselves for trying to get a settlement because of his material underperformance season to date, that he should just take the ambassadorial role and whatever coins Red Bull want to throw at him. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's quite right.
Not sure I agree with that. Isn't it that he wants his percentage of the money that he's taking to Red Bull and that they continue to have on the car with the ongoing contracts that he's got, that the team has with these sponsors, and that's his commission, 16 million? Isn't that how he would see it?
I think he just wants to get. I mean, he's got a contract.
I'm being slightly cynical, but
I think he's got a contract, Peter, and he wants to be paid for it. If he's going to,
well, quite right. So let's call it 8 million for the contract when he was actually being paid 12 or whatever, and the rest of it can be his commission for bringing the sponsors to the team.
I think they'll have to give him whatever they were going to pay him to sit in the car. I think they'll have to pay him that to be an ambassador. I think they're going to be net the same.
But that's how they should pay him, I think, because he's brought a lot of money to that team, and just being pay him 16 million to be an ambassador. Then simple as that. If they want to cut it,
I think that's what's going to happen, Peter.
Yeah,
I think they're going to have to. He's got a contract, and apparently a contract with his son's performance clauses, which makes the negotiation even more difficult. But hey, going to be an interesting.
And I presume Liam Lawson will be on like 1.2 million or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. Crazy.
He might get free expenses, probably.
Oh, it's
might even get to fly in Max's plane.
Oh, yeah, maybe, or maybe not. If he's not a cooperative rear gunner for Max, it's going to be interesting.
Oh, he'll be cooperative. He'll definitely be cooperative.
So? Do you think so?
Oh
Peter?
yeah. No, he'll know. He'll do a good job there in the other car for sure.
He's got to know on which side his bread is buttered. Yeah. He was asked actually which car does he think he'll be in next year, and he said, "Mate, I don't care about the colour of it. I just need to get myself a seat in."
Well, he's right. He's absolutely right. Yeah. And if he has to stay where he is, that's not a bad option either. It's not a bad option for Yuki Tsunoda either. If he stays where he is, at least he's in Formula One driving.
100%. As we round third base, Peter, super generous of your time as always. Talk to me about Bartoletto and F2 now. We will see him in F1 as one of, I want to say, 5 rookies next year. How do you rate Bartoletto? Do you think he's got the minerals to be an F1 champion in the future?
Don't know. I can't answer that really. I really can't. I haven't seen enough of him in Formula 2. It's not that I haven't been paying attention. It's just that I've been watching other drivers, I think. So I just don't know. Enough people shouting and screaming about how good he is that I guess he's half reasonable. But I'm always wary of drivers that are heavily promoted either by other drivers or by big sponsors or by the media or by the general public. It's the guys who are in the corner that nobody's talking about that I'm always interested in, usually. And unfortunately, Bortoletto, for me, didn't fall into that category. There was always a big fanfare about him. So I kind of switched him off in my mind quite early on in the whole thing. So I'm giving a boring answer and saying I don't know for that. Good to have a Brazilian in Formula 1. It's about all I can say in response, I guess.
100%. Who then did you have your eye on in F2, Peter?
Well, I did. I think Zane Maloney is very good. I know he's in Formula E now. I thought he was very good, and I was also obviously watching Oliver Behrman versus Antonelli a lot and trying to sort of see them up close and personal. I think one of the things that's weird about Formula 2 this year is how badly Prema have gone and how difficult the Prema car is to drive, quite obviously. And you've got somebody like Dino Beganovic, who I really rate Dino, just coming in and going as well as he did. It says a lot about Dino, but equally, it doesn't say much about Prema, does it? That he can blow them away, and how difficult Oliver and Antonelli have found that car. That's been the big shock, I suppose, if I think about Formula 2. The big shock is how badly Prema have gone this year. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I think Behrman, it's interesting with Behrman, isn't it? And he's worth talking about because he's looked pretty good in Formula 2, even if you take into account where Prema are. he's looked pretty good, and he's kind of been there or thereabouts with Antonelli. But if you just arrived this year to watch Formula 2, you wouldn't have said, wow, look at this. But whenever he's been out in the Haas, he's been brilliant. And he was obviously excellent in the Ferrari as well. So in many ways, he's been one of the great drivers of the year, I think. Every time he's got in a car, a Formula One car, he's gone really well.
Yeah.
So Oliver, I think I'm a big fan of Oliver Behrman. I know he's a sort of George Russellish type driver in terms of his style, but yeah, we need those as well as we need Antonelli's, who's definitely of the Oscar Piastri ilk in terms of getting into the corner a bit earlier than Oliver.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how Antonelli goes. Funny all that business about him being unwell, wasn't it? So unwell that he couldn't drive. It's quite unusual to have a driver that unwell.
It's a good point, but I mean, he's human, eh, Peter? Everybody gets.
Well, he's human, but it's just when you look at him, he doesn't look like Oliver Behrman, who looks like a sort of standard super fit mega racing driver. He looks a little bit sort of diminutive, fragile, and he look, as I keep saying, he looks very Stefano Modena like. For those that remember Stefano Modena, and he doesn't look sort of Luke Browningish, who looks, Luke Browning looks like he's just walked out of the gym, a la Christian Clean. But but Antonelli's got this sort of slightly interesting aura about him, really. He's got an aura, definitely, Antonelli.
Yeah.
I hesitate to use the word a Senna aura, but at the moment I'm staying with my Modena likeness. But he's definitely got something that's, whoa. And when he walks into a room, there's this guy, whether it's a pizza restaurant in the middle of nowhere, or whether it's a big room of people, he's definitely got an aura.
That halo impact. I think that's why so many people are quick to say Senna, that he's reminiscent of that something. There's something intangible. The look of a champion, if that's a thing that you can speak to. He's got that. Peter.
I don't know. There's definitely but with Senna, when he was in Formula 3 or Formula Ford 2000, and you went to speak to him after the qualifying session or the race, and he took his helmet off, it wasn't the aura of a world champion. It was the aura of, this guy is different and a bit special. It was that aura. It wasn't, the aura of the world champion. No, it wasn't that. It was the same thing. You feel that about other drivers too. Carlos Reutemann had that, absolutely, for sure. Patrick Depailler had that. For me, I'm only talking about my personal experiences. Obviously, Jim Clark had it. And in recent times, Lewis definitely had it. Whenever you were near him in Formula 3 days or before that, there was something very special about this guy. Everything he did, the way he dressed, the way he moved, the way he walked, everything. And it's a little bit the same with Antonelli. And Senna definitely had it.
What? Come on, sorry,
but it's not a champion thing. It's just this aura thing of being something very special.
Yeah, it's. I'm gonna push you, Peter, to try and define what it. Because I remember Lewis in particular, 06, I want to say, in GP2. There was almost like a. He was almost like an irrepressible force of nature. That he was doing these things that were just. I'll never forget the overtaking maneuver on Pizzione and PK 3 deep into maggots. It's like how it was almost this. It was something different, wasn't it? What is this X factor of which you speak? Pete, like, try and define it.
Well, I think it's a very good question, Cameron. I think it's a personal thing based on our own individual origins in motorsport and what brought us to motorsport and what we like about it and what drivers have impressed us in the past and what memories we have. And it's all to do with that. And I think to generalize is very difficult. All you can do is talk about your individual experiences. And if I think about Lewis in those early years, the thing I remember most about Lewis was after he won the Monaco F2 race on the Sunday morning, it was very obvious that Ron Dennis had said to him, go and get a new pair of trousers. They were a bit scruffy. Because the chinos he had on Sunday morning in the McLaren motorhome were about 5 inches too long for him. And he wasn't doing it because he was a funky fashion guy at that point. He was just doing it because he had to go and buy a pair of beige chinos, which is what he was wearing. And they didn't really fit. And they were obviously the only ones they had. And I just thought, wow, that is so cool that he's done that. And he doesn't really care. And he's just there because he won the Monaco F2 race. And I just, yeah, that's what I remember about Lewis. Very natural, actually. A very natural kid. I don't know if I can use that word. I guess he was a kid then. And I think, yeah, I suppose what I'm getting around to saying is this aura about which we've been speaking is a natural thing, and it's different for everybody. And with the case of Stefano Modena, it wasn't that pleasant because he was a very unpleasant guy. In my experience, he wasn't very civil and wasn't very polite and not very talkative. But he had an aura, definitely had an aura, and that aura very similar to the one that Antonelli projects at the moment. For me, anyway. I think more about Modena when I see Antonelli than I do Senna, that's for sure. And how good was Modena? He was actually pretty good. He never really got a decent car, but he was pretty good, pretty quick. So don't think I'm running the guy down. I'm not. Yeah. And then it's other things. You know, it's other things you experience with drivers away from the racetrack that you see them doing or not doing. And I mean, for me, Jarno truly had an aura about him. Definitely, there was this mysterious guy who was obviously Italian, but not very Italian. Who was named after a Finnish MotoGP guy. Sadly, lost his life. Who had his vineyard and loved lots of things outside Formula One. He wasn't a sort of a classic Italian racing driver by any means. He was very, very focused and very calm. And he had this aura as a result. It was the Jarno Trulli aura, definitely.
And he wasn't a bad peddler. Jarno, the old Trulli train. I'd agree with you, Peter. For me, this X factor that we're talking about, probably best epitomised by turn 9 Lewis Hamilton round the outside of George Russell. It's this thing that they are able to do that not too many F1.
Yeah, but that was hards versus mediums.
True,
to me, that's a little bit unfair to George. I think wasn't George going to let him go anyway or not?
Well, I don't know if George has that in his locker, Peter. I would argue that George, as we've always described him, is a very raw killer of an F1
Yeah, but
driver.
For fourth place when nobody cared and it was Lewis's last race, I think he might have opened the door a little bit there. I think I may be wrong, but
I think the backstory to that is that going into cumulatively, as far as their points hauls, George and Lewis, over the time that they've been in Mercedes together, they went into Abu Dhabi and they were level over the course of the 3 seasons. And so I think George would have been aware of that as much as Lewis would have been. So I don't think, if I know George Russell, I don't think he would have given that up lightly, knowing.
I can't imagine Lewis was aware of that or even cared about it. I mean, to him, it was just like 3 years of misery in a terrible car, wasn't it? Yeah. Isn't that generally how he'll think about it? There 1 or 2 bright spots, obviously, but whether he outpointed George in a bad car over 3 years, no, I'm sure. I think George probably didn't want to push it too far, and Lewis ahead of him on the mediums was no big drama, was it? No. If it was for the race win, different story, obviously. Yeah. But for P4,
who cares?
Nah, who cares? Yeah. Oh, if you do care, then there's something wrong with you.
I mean,
so I'm not saying P4 isn't worth fighting for. You're a racing driver. It is. All I'm saying is for us outside, P4 is not a huge deal, is it?
No, it's not material. It isn't material. And on that bombshell, Mr. Windsor, you've been a legend as per usual.
Yeah, it's been a different one, this one, Cameron, because we're talking about quite broad subjects that sometimes are well beyond the scope of the normal stats and structures that we have based on a race. And I just finished by saying, we're all individuals and we all have our own feelings about racing and what we love about racing and what conjures that magic for us. And there's always going to be that. That's the great thing about motor racing in general and Formula One in particular, I guess. But as most people probably know, I was at Monza for the Abu Dhabi weekend because I just love the ability to stand right up next to cars and drivers that are being driven absolutely at their limit but sideways with handbrake turns and perfect judgment between walls. And all the Formula One drivers, most of them can do that as well. But we don't actually see that showcase in the way it does in rallying. And speaking of aura, the minute Terry Neuville walked into the thing as the new world champion, it was the Italian fans just went ballistic. It was a brilliant moment. I was thinking on the way back, actually, it's kind of weird, isn't it? We had Gilles Villeneuve, Newtown, and we have Terry Neuville, Newtown.
Wow.
It's weird, isn't it? That they've both got the same name, but in reverse.
Yeah.
I think if Gilles saw the way Terry Neuville drives, he would just go right on. And I think the same Terry for Gilles. Absolutely.
Chef's kiss. No, what a way to pay homage to the great man, Gilles.
Yeah. I mean, Gilles would be flattered, I think, to be mentioned in the same breath as Terry Neuville, as Terry would be and is for sure.
Yeah, neither one of whom are bad peddlers, hardly, to say the least.
As good as it gets, I'd say.
Just a tad, Mr. Windsor. Peter, you've been an absolute legend. Thank you again, as always, for your time. If you enjoy Mr. Windsor's God-tier level F1 insights and rally insights, motorsport insights, then get over to that YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button. Peter Windsor, if you're not already, what are you doing with your life? Shortly thereafter, on your favourite podcasting platform, follow and 5 stars for the Short Corners podcast. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to like, share and drop a comment. I've been your boy Cameron CC. That's been the legend that is Peter D. Windsor. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.